Hello everyone, we said we were gonna show one more game from round 9 of the 2019 Sinquefield Cup and then discuss the standings a bit. It's Wesley So versus Ian Nepomniachtchi, and it really is a terrific grind. So if you don't have the stomach for a long grind, you maybe want to skip this one. But if you do, let's just enjoy it. So without further ado, Wesley with the white pieces opens with knight to f3. The Rd8 is on the board and we have c5 by Nepo. Inviting Wesley to either play e4 and transpose into a Sicilian, or maybe c4 and transpose into the English opening, which Wesley does. So knight to c6, we continue with the English, knight to c3, and now g6. Nepo prepares to fianchetto his dark square bishop. With e3, and now knight to f6. With d4, grabbing more space in the center, c captures on d4, e captures on d4, and now d5. With c captures on d5, knight captures on d5, and now queen to b3, pressuring the knight here. So here you can either defend it, you could capture on c3, but this way white gets bishop to c4 in before recapturing, as the f7 pawn is now threatened. So once black defends it, now you capture on c3, also playable. But after queen b3, Nepo prefers e6 right away. So bishop to b5 by Wesley. Bishop to g7, preparing to castle, and both players castle now. Now that the knight on c6 is no longer pinned, Wesley takes this opportunity to create an isolated pawn on c6 with bishop captures, b captures, and now knight to a4. Not only does black have an isolated pawn on c6, but also white now has an excellent outpost on c5 for his knight. And you will not be able to kick the knight away from there, as you don't have a b pawn or a d pawn. With queen to d6, just developing the queen, preparing to develop the light square bishop, and rook to e1. With rook to b8, pushing away the queen, queen back to d1, and now knight back to e7. Here, black has an isolated c pawn, but white also has an isolated d pawn. And now black already nicely attacks the pawn with the bishop and the queen. Now the idea is knight e7 to f5, and from f5 the knight will also be attacking the d4 pawn. So black has a weakness, but white also has a weakness. So knight e7, going after the f5 square to attack the d4 pawn. With b3, white prepares bishop to b2 to add another defender to the b4 pawn. And now knight to f5. Honing in on the weakness with bishop to b2, and now rook to d8, adding another attacker to the d4 pawn. And here white has no more ways of adding more defenders to the pawn. You could play something like rook e8, but that's just weird. So there is one game in the database. It's actually from the women's candidates tournament, Alexandra Goryachkina versus Maria Muzichuk, where rook to c1 was played. That game ended in a draw. Also, the idea is just going after all the trades on d4, you will be able to recapture the pawn on c6. But here we have queen to c2. It's not a new move, it's been played before, but the idea is similar. So we have a lot of trades in the center now, with knight captures on d4, bishop captures on d4, bishop captures, we have captures, and now not captures right away, because if you capture on c6, you get bishop to d7, and, well, you're going to lose the knight on a4. You're not going to lose a piece, but you will get your pawn structure messed up. For example, queen f3, now you capture, and after recaptures, queen captures on a4, and you will end this variation being down a pawn. So instead, after queen captures on d4, we have rook 8 to d1. Now you have to be careful, otherwise you're going to lose the rook on d8. Queen to f6, and now also there is one game in the database where queen to c3 was played. Queen c3 was played between Muradli and Safarli in 2019, and that game ended with black winning after rook captures on d1, rook captures on d5. Black didn't win because white played queen c3. It was just, a different line was played, but black won in the end. Here we have rook captures on d8 instead. So rook captures on d8 with check. Queen captures on d8, recapturing, and now just rook to d1. Wesley prefers this idea. I believe rook captures on d8. Sorry, forgot to mention this. Rook captures on d8 was still not a new move in the game. I believe, yeah, I think rook, no. I actually don't remember where the new move in the game was, so sorry about that. I know that when we moved into that position, yeah, rook captures on d8. I think rook captures on d8 is the new move in a new position, but I will have to check. And if it is, I'm not gonna say anything. If it's not, I will mention something in the comments. So rook captures on d8, and we have a completely new game. Queen captures on d8, and now rook to d1, just grabbing hold of the d file. Queen to e8, and now h3, creating some space for the white king, and now e5. Nepo continues pushing the pawn, or maybe even f5 can be played. We have queen to c5 now, going after a7, and now comes a6, just defending. Queen to a5, Wesley now prepares rook to d8 to win the queen, and so king to g7. Just getting the king out of the way. Rook to d8, and now comes queen to e7. And here, a very interesting move by Wesley, a very creative move, knight to b6. So obviously you're giving up a knight, but in return you're picking up a pawn with check, so you're grabbing your pawn back and picking up the rook on b8, since the bishop is still undeveloped on c8. And Nepo says, alright, let's do this. We have queen captures on d8, queen captures on e5 with check, queen to f6 blocking, and now queen captures on b8. So Wesley won his pawn back, and bishop to e6. So now we have this position where the material on the board is equal, although as you can see, Nepo has 3 pawn islands, Wesley has only 2 pawn islands, so it is white should be a little bit better, as the 2 pawns might become easy targets. Maybe not if the queens are on the board, but if the queens get off the board, then definitely it will be the case. Queen back to g3 by Wesley, and now h5. The problem is, if you go for this pawn grab with queen a1 check, king h2, and queen captures on a2, then queen e5 check ensures a draw. Because if you look at the pawns and the bishop, they're all on light squares, so you're really not all that great on the dark squares. You can just continue checking. If you go here, then you're getting you're just lost. g4 is coming and so on. So you have to go back. Queen e5 check. You can go king f8, queen d6 check. You're gonna go back. King g8 now. Queen b8, b8 check. King g7. You're gonna go back and so on. You're going to continue checking the black king along the dark squares. So for the moment it's impossible to go for this pawn grab, but Nepo prepares it with h5. Now the king also has the h7 square to hide from all the checks on the dark squares. With knight to a4 by Wesley, and now he wants to activate the knight, but now Nepo goes for the pawn with knight to queen to a1 check, king to h2, and now queen captures on a2. And now knight to c5. If queen e5 check, we said that now you can hide on h7 and there are no more checks. So knight to c5, going after knight captures bishop, which would really mess up black's pawn structure. So you get queen to e2. The queen now guards the bishop with queen to c3 check, king to g8, and now queen to d4. A nice centralizing move with the queen, with bishop to d5, now putting the bishop to a very dangerous diagonal, and now knight to d7, going for knight f6 check, and from there things can get very dangerous. So queen to e6, now getting the queen back into the defense, knight to f6 check, and now king to f8. And b4 now. This one pawn will be used to control both of Nepo's pawns, the a pawn and the c pawn, since they are still on light squares, and Wesley's b4 pawn is on a dark square. You cannot attack it with the bishop, since the bishop is a light square bishop, and the queen will be unable to do anything about it, since Wesley's queen is also keeping an eye on the pawn. So we have queen to d6 with check, king back to g1, and now king to e7. Now Nepo starts bringing the king into the game, which is not something you see very often when the queens are still on the board. We have knight to g8 check, and now even king to e6. We have queen to f6 check. This is really crazy. King to d7, and now comes queen to d4, just bringing the queen back to keep an eye on the b4 pawn. With queen to b8, not allowing this infiltration, with queen to a7, also keeping an eye on the b4 pawn, and now knight back to f6 with check. King e6, and now knight to e4. Capturing at d5 also doesn't do anything for black, so Wesley goes knight to e4, and Nepo decides that it's time to trade. With bishop captures, queen captures with check, king d7. So here you can see that it's queen and pawn endgame where Nepo is up a pawn, but can he actually do anything about it? Well, one thing he can try is he can try to grind it out if it's possible. With queen c4, going after the f7 pawn, queen to e8, defending the pawn. Now the idea is that if you capture on a6, queen e1 check, you'll have to either move the king or play queen f1, you lose the b4 pawn, and now black gets a passed c pawn, which is pretty much enough for a win. So after queen e8, queen back to d4 check, with king to c8, and now queen to b6, going after the pawn. And now black uses a series of checks to remaneuver the queen over to b5, with queen e1 check, king h2, and queen to e5 check. g3, and now queen to b5, guarding both of the pawns, with queen to a7, queen to b7, pushing the queen back, queen to c7, and now, queen to c5, and now queen to c7. With h4 by white, not allowing h4 by black, as that was the threat. And now king back to b7, now the king is keeping an eye on both of the pawns on the queen side. With queen to f8, waiting to see what black will play, also keeping an eye on the f7 pawn, and now queen d7. With king back to g1, and now queen to d5. With king back to h2, and now king to c7. Again, Nepo sees that there is no way of breaking through here with only the queen, so you have to try and bring the king into the game. King g1 with king d7. King back to h2, and now queen to c4. With king back to g1, and now queen back to e6. With queen to c5, and now queen to e2. Queen to d4 check, with king to e6, now again bringing the king deeper into the position, queen to c5, and now queen b5, clearing the fifth rank for the black king, with queen e3 check, and now king to f6. Now you can try entering the position, well, maybe king g5, king g4, maybe even king h3 if it's possible, who knows. Queen c3 check, and sorry, not f3, queen c3 check. And now king back to e7, with queen to d4, not allowing the black king to enter the position, king back to e6, with queen to e3 check, king to d7, and now queen to a7 check, with king to e8, and now queen back to d4. Queen to d5, offering a queen trade, of course, Wesley declines this, queen to b6, and now queen to c4, again keeping an eye on all the three weaknesses here. With queen to b8 check, king to e7, and now queen to e5 check, king d7, so still not able to do anything about it, queen to b8, just keeping an eye on the b4 pawn, and king to e6, with queen to e8 check, king to f5, and now queen to e7, again keeping an eye on the b4 pawn, queen d5, and now comes queen to e2. With queen to b5, again offering a queen trade, and queen back to e7. With queen to c4, and now queen to e8. Wesley can only wait and see what Nepo will do, and if Nepo makes some sort of a bad, rash decision, then Wesley will of course try to punish it. With queen to e6, again offering a trade, and now queen to d8. With king to e4, now the king is already quite active on e4, with queen to d2, preparing to push the king back, queen to c4, keeping an eye on the squares where white can deliver check, but also queen to e3 is possible to deliver check. King f5, and now queen back to e7. Now the king can be pushed back with queen to g5, for example, but king to g4, and now it's very interesting. You can deliver queen to g5 check, but if you deliver queen to g5 check, what can black play? Black can play king to h3, and now it's very problematic. You can no longer check the black king, as all of these squares are nicely covered by the pawns, and once you make a move and try to do it, you're either losing this pawn, or if you give up the light squares, you can either even get checkmated. So if you allow king h3, you're lost. Queen to d7 check, not giving up on this diagonal, king to f3, and now queen to d2. So again, hoping for queen e3 check, but now f6. It's not much, but it's something. queen e3 check, king has to go back, king g4, and now king g2 already with some mating ideas with f3 if white can cover up all of the squares. So king back to f5. You know, an active king is good, a too active of a king is not good. King to h2, and now g5 with h captures, f captures, and now queen to d2. Again, defending the b4 pawn, with queen to d5, again offering a trade, and now queen to e2, with queen to d4, again going after the pawn. And here, the problem is, if you defend it, for example, queen e1, you get h4. After g captures, you get pawn captures, and here it will be very difficult. You're still down a pawn, and black will have somewhat of an easier task trading queens, as your king is now wide open. Wesley decides for a different idea, king g1, but now you lose the b4 pawn. With queen captures on b4, now comes queen f3 check, king to e5, and now queen captures on h5. So now still only up a pawn, but now those are two pass pawns on the queen side, whereas white has no pass pawns. He may be able to create one later with f4, but for now he doesn't have any. With queen to b1 with check, king g2, and now queen to f5, keeping an eye on this pawn, and now he's ready to start pushing the a pawn. With queen to d1, and now a5. Queen back to d8, going after the a5 pawn, king to e4. Now the pawn is defended by the queen. We have queen to d2, again keeping an eye on the king. The e3 square is available for checks, and now queen d5. Now the check will be met with a discovered check. With f3 check first, king to f5, and now g4 check. King back to e6, and now queen to c2. With king to d6, hiding the king, and now king to g3. Queen to e5 check, with king back to g2, and now queen to f4, trying to support the pawn's advancement to a4. With queen to g6 check, king to c7, and now comes queen to h7 check. King to b6, hiding behind his pass pawns. Queen b1 check, and now queen b4 blocking check, with queen to c1, and now queen to c5. Queen back to b2 check, king a6, and now queen to a2. And queen to b5. Now black is ready to continue pushing the pawns, with queen to g8, going for some checks along the back rank, and now a4. With queen to a8 check, king to b6, and now queen to d8 check. King to b7, with queen to e7 check, and now king back to a6. Queen f8, you have to prepare another check, but now queen e2 check. With king to h3, and now comes queen e3. You will be able to always block check with queen to a7. So queen to a8 check, with king to b5 first, and now queen to b7 with check. Queen back to b6, and now queen to g7, and queen to c5 first. With queen to b2 check, king to a6, and now queen to e2, again with check, king a7, and now there are no checks from this position. The e7 square is covered by the black queen. So we have queen to d2, preparing for more checks, but now a3. So slowly but surely, Nepo is pushing the passed pawn. And finally, Wesley decides to create a pass pawn of his own with f4, g captures, queen captures, and now queen to c3 check. King to h4, and now queen to h8 check, king to g5, and queen to g8 check. We have king to h5, and now queen d5 check. So again, a series of checks to remaneuver the queen to a nice centralized square. We have g5, and now a2. The queen from d5 nicely guards the a2 square. We have queen to a4 check, king to b6, and now queen to b4 check. Queen b5 blocks, queen d4 check, and now king back to a6. And queen to d8, going for more checks from behind, but now we have queen to e2 check. King to h6, we have queen to e6 check, g6, and now queen to h3 check. We have king to g5. King to g5. If you play king to g7, then you get a1 queen with check. So this is obviously lost. So after queen h3, we have king g5, but now queen to g2 check. And it was in this position on move 132 that Wesley So resigned the game. But when he resigned, I think he had some 3 seconds on the clock, so he didn't feel like trying to try something here. Trying to try, that sounds weird. but yeah, he stopped trying to try something. But yeah, you can see it was a really intensive grind, and here he resigns because you have to play something. For example, if King H8, then you get sorry about that. If King to H6, you can get Queen to H1 with check. And now, after King to G5, you will play Queen D5 with check. You just trade queens and it's a win. For example, now you trade queens, captures, and after G7, you get A1 queen. White brings a queen into the game, but now just Queen A2 check. King has to move, King F6, and now you pick up the queen, and of course, it's game over. So yeah. That's the game. Now let's check out the standings before we forget, but let's just return to this resigning position. So here are the standings. Let's just see what happens here. So in first place, after winning in round 9, Ding Liren and Ian Nepomniachtchi, followed by Vishwanathan Anand and Sergei Karyakin with 5 points. Then we have 3 people with 4.5 points: Magnus Carlsen, Fabiano Caruana, and Shahriar Mamedyarov. With 4 points, Anish Giri, Maxim Vashilagrov, Wesley So, and Hikaru Nakamura. And with 3.5 points and 2 losses, Levon Arunan. So the only people without a loss so far are Ding Liren, Ian Nepomniachtchi, Sergei Karyakin, Vishwanathan Anand, Magnus Carlsen, and Shahriar Mamedyarov. So 6 people without a loss, and Carlsen and Mamedyarov are also without a win. So 2 of them seem to be having a contest on who's going to pull a Giri in this tournament. But yeah, definitely an exciting match, Ding versus Nepomniachtchi, and there was a lot of discussion online on who would Magnus prefer as his challenger in the 2020 World Championship. Would he prefer maybe Ian Nepomniachtchi or Ding Liren as his challenger? So also, if you have an opinion on that, feel free to comment in the comment section. But yeah, two more rounds to go. It's going to be very interesting to see if Nepo can take it all the way, or maybe Ding will take it all the way, as Nepo blundered the game against Anand in round 1. It's really amazing that he climbed back on top, 2 rounds before the end of the tournament. So we're going to see how it goes. So once again, I do hope you enjoyed it. It was a really intensive grind, so hope you enjoyed that. I would like to thank Matthew Bell for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Sinquefield Cup, continuing the Capablanca saga. We're going to check out Benko versus Stahl from the 1962 Curaçao tournament, and of course checking up on your excellent suggestions. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.